This video is brought to you by CatBeast.com. Design your own custom snapbacks and hats.
Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. Today we return to talking about our two least favorite progressives out there today. First, Bernie Sanders, the Democratic and Socialist candidate for President of the United States of America. Well, he got himself into yet another little dramatic incident this week. This time he got caught endorsing one of the worst and most dishonest liberals out there, none other than Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks here on YouTube. Cenk is running for office now too, vying to be a congressman for part of the valley just north of Los Angeles, California. A district he doesn't live in, nor does he know very little about it. Basically, Cenk is trying to leverage his fame from working at the Young Turks for years, and he wants to spin that into a political career now, I guess. I highly doubt this will happen now though, because as the title of this video suggests, Bernie endorsed the guy and then he had to quickly retract it. And after we go over more about Cenk Uygur today, you'll quickly see why. But first, let me quickly thank CatBeast again for sponsoring today's video. CatBeast has some awesome snapbacks and caps, and they have really good prices too, so make sure you check out their links below in the description of this video. Now back to Cenk Uygur and the Young Turks. They're of course a massive liberal propaganda pushing fake news outlet that is pretty popular here on YouTube, despite them being terrible. Yeah, they get pushed and promoted by this site constantly too, so combine that with their massive corporate sponsors and, well, they pretty much dominate the left-wing internet news thing. And before other major news outlets like CNN and MSNBC, well, before they migrated to YouTube more, TYT was formerly one of the first and only ones out there for a while. But none of this success was gained because they were good reporters or excellent newscasters. No, really, they ticked all the right boxes for themselves to be this liberal darling of a channel, and so they've ridden this wave of progressivism straight to the top, so to speak. And Cenk Uygur and the Young Turks were almost going to go legitimate recently too. They even helped found and establish political groups like the Justice Democrats, who also in turn ran Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as their candidate in New York City last year. Her, of course, winning and turning into another Democratic darling basically overnight, and for no good reason other than she's young and mildly attractive. But here's the thing, Bernie should have known better than to endorse Cenk Uygur now, because a good chunk of his base and that Justice Democrat group, which I just mentioned, well, they all ousted and disavowed Cenk themselves years ago. For example, here's an article from 2017 where Huffington Post goes over why the progressive group, the Justice Democrats, ousted Cenk Uygur over past sexist writings. That's right, Cenk has a bit of a sexist streak in his past. He's basically been caught saying he thinks women are inferior in some ways, like they have defects or something compared to men. That's a pretty strange way to put it, to say the least, and it's definitely not true. Had Cenk just acknowledged the biological differences between the genders and noted that we both have our own strengths and weaknesses, perhaps that argument could have fared better, but the way his line of reasoning went was brutal and terrible. And alas, if you know Cenk Uygur like I do, and like how most of us YouTubers and anti-SJW types do, well, you know, Cenk has no class at all, and he doesn't have style or tact either when he speaks or when he writes. He's just this loud, over-the-top, boisterous type guy who yells, "Of course!" all the time, and he often makes wild theories and claims too, like what we're going over today. Here's a few examples of Cenk's anti-female writing. This section of the article goes over it. It says, "Obviously the genes of women are flawed." Uygur wrote in a 1999 post lamenting the inadequate amount of sex he was having while living in Miami, Florida. "They are poorly designed creatures who do not want to have sex nearly as often as needed for the human race to get along peaceably and fruitfully." In a 2002 entry in which Uygur described the rules of dating, he specified that there must be an orgasm by the 5th date. And in a 2003 column, he described drunken revelry at Mardi Gras in New Orleans, Louisiana, where he kissed over 23 different women, saw and felt countless breasts. Wow, just wow. Sounds to me like Cenk wasn't getting laid so much, so he went full incel and tried to lash out at the ladies for not accepting him. And he condemned the girls online to try and make himself feel better and stroke his own ego. And also, it's important to keep in mind the big points here. First of all, Cenk isn't just rolling with your run-of-the-mill average everyday Democrats or liberals. No, for years, Cenk has tried to ingratiate himself with the most progressive and extreme leftists out there. We're talking about democratic, socialist, virtual communists who adhere to the ideals of feminism, diversity, multiculturalism, and acceptance to the extreme. So that means Cenk is under a very big microscope here. He and anyone else who attempts to appease these kinds of Puritans in politics, they better be squeaky clean as hell. And obviously Cenk is not, and his questionable thoughts and writings about women are certainly going to go over even worse with the very extreme progressives he's trying to woo. The second thing to keep in mind at this point is, remember, we're talking about an article and story that came out 2 years ago. These sexist comments from Cenk were unearthed in 2017, and the Justice Democrats kicked him out back then too because they had to. They would lose all credibility keeping this person around and being that hypocritical. But now, for some reason, 2 years later, in the present, Bernie Sanders either forgot about this or just didn't care. I think it's likely to be either of those options, but surely someone on his team would have reminded him of this before he publicly endorsed Cenk, a move which he will quickly retract in embarrassment and certainly regret in the future. But wait, there's more. We're really only getting started on Cenk's big and glaring downsides and embarrassments, because the list of things that he said which should completely disqualify him from office is very long. And since this is old news already, Bernie should have really known better before endorsing him, but regardless, this shit show is happening anyway. For our next example, let's talk about and go over one of Cenk's most glaring and obvious and terrible flaws, which most people should be aware of by now. It's been pretty publicly known that Cenk was an Armenian genocide denier for many years, and it shouldn't really surprise anyone who knows about the guy either. Not only is he from the country of Turkey, the country and former empire who basically conducted the genocide against the Armenians, but also Cenk's own YouTube channel is named after the group who carried out that atrocity. The Young Turks name wasn't original to YouTube and their channel by any means. Cenk got that name because he was inspired by this violent political group who ended up slaughtering many back in the day, and they did so based on people's races and backgrounds, for the record. Yeah, the Young Turks took their name from a group like that, so it's kind of hard to believe Cenk even got caught up in any of this. And only recently did he even try and admit that the Armenian genocide actually happened. And believe it or not, it actually gets even worse from here. And when I say it gets worse than getting caught denying a genocide, well, that's when you know things are going to go real bad. And rather than explaining this one first, let's go ahead and just listen to a clip and let Cenk dig his own grave. Check out this video and see what he has to say about animals.
If I were the benevolent dictator of the world, I would legalize bestiality where you are giving, where you are pleasuring the animal. You see what I'm saying?
No, Cenk, we do not know what you're saying. And judging by the reactions of your co-host and crew here that happens after I pause this, well, they think you're sounding crazy too. Needless to say, anyone who thinks making love to animals should be legalized, well, they need to get their heads checked. In addition, they obviously shouldn't be taken seriously, especially in politics. Let alone should people vote for a guy like this and elect him into public office. This Cenk guy would literally have some power that is needed to make this animal-loving suggestion he wants legal. Absolutely insane. And to think a presidential candidate like Bernie Sanders once went so far as to endorse this guy, well, it really says a lot about him and the progressives. And it also says a lot about Cenk and the socialists that are trying to take over the Democratic Party. Finally, now that we've gone over Cenk and the Young Turks and their obvious and glaring biases and misdeeds in the past, let's now talk more about the Bernie Sanders side of the story that happened recently. An article from USA Today has more details. It's called "Bernie Sanders Rescinds Endorsement of Cenk Uygur for California Congressional Seat." This should be good. Let's go ahead and check it out. Senator Bernie Sanders rescinded his endorsement of progressive talk show host Cenk Uygur for a congressional seat Friday following criticism of Uygur's past derogatory remarks about women. Sanders initially endorsed Uygur Thursday for his strong support for Medicare for All and said Uygur was a voice that we desperately need in Congress and will be a great representative for California 25 and the country. Uygur, 49, is the founder of the liberal YouTube political news show The Young Turks and is campaigning to fill the congressional seat recently vacated by Representative Katie Hill, who had to resign in shame because she got caught philandering with her employees. Uygur endorsed Sanders for both the 2016 and 2020 presidential elections. Yeah, so basically, Uygur has been a big Bernie bro. He's been fanboying for Sanders since 2016. This is quite funny too, since it does make this endorsement and backing out of it even worse. Cenk was super stoked that he got Bernie's endorsement, which he shouldn't have gotten in the first place, but it does make sense he got excited about it. So to then lose that endorsement so quickly after it happened and after Cenk had time to brag about it on TV, well, that must be a devastating blow to the guy. Not to mention, it's going to virtually be the end of Cenk's campaign as we know it. There's no real coming back from something like this in politics. So while he was a long shot to begin with and Cenk has little chance in politics anyway, well, now with this Bernie unendorsement happening, the guy is pretty much finished if you ask me. Sanders wrote on Twitter Friday that he heard his supporters were frustrated and understand their concerns. Cenk today said he's rejecting all endorsements for his campaign and "I retract my endorsement." endorsement. Quoting Bernie's tweet, Cenk Uygur has been a longtime fighter against corruption. However, our movement is bigger than any one person. I hear my supporters who are frustrated and understand their concerns. Cenk today said he is rejecting all endorsements for his campaign, and I retract my endorsement. Well, that's pretty much the biggest non-apology Bernie could give. Not only does he not apologize, he's also not addressing any of the greater issues. And while this article and others claim it's just because of Cenk's very sexist remarks in the past, we all know it's much more and far worse than just that. The least Bernie could do would be to at least acknowledge something here, but instead, he dodges the real issues and retracts his previous endorsement, basically running away in shame. Uygur declared Friday that his campaign would refuse all endorsement moving forward. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the endorsements of Bernie Sanders, Ro Khanna, Nina Turner, and local progressive groups that gave me their support. Their stance took real courage in the face of the corporate media and Democratic establishment onslaught, Uygur said on Twitter. Uygur has apologized and disavowed his past comments, telling CNN in an interview last month that he wrote that stuff 19 years ago. He deleted it 15 years ago, not because I got caught or because I thought somebody was going to find it. I deleted it because I didn't believe it anymore. This is not me. I was trying to be a stupid, politically incorrect Republican, so I wrote these things I knew were offensive. Nice. What a priceless and totally dishonest reaction from Cenk, which is a weird name, by the way. I haven't got to say that, but Cenk is a very weird name, and it's hard for me to think he could think running on that name is a good idea. I mean, not that he should change his name, but putting Cenk 2020 on your posters is kind of confusing because it looks like it says Cenk. But regardless, I think we can all tell by now that this guy says dumb shit all the time, and he's highly untrustworthy too. And also, he will never admit he was truly wrong or failed in an honest way. Like here, he's basically saying he was wrong back then because he was a Republican back then, as if that excuses his actions at the time. This is a common excuse Cenk uses a lot too. He likes to claim he was a Republican for years and then turned Democrat later in life and sort of corrected the error of his ways. Convenient enough though, this usually comes up when an old quote like this pops up on him, and then Cenk blames it on his former Republicanism like he was a different person at that time. But even if this was true, becoming a Democrat later in life doesn't excuse your behavior from before that happened. Also, let's not pretend 15 or 19 years ago was that long for someone like Cenk. The guy's almost 50 years old, so he was still over 30 when these things were said and written. So even though he tries to act like he was younger and dumber and like that's a good excuse too, but really it's not. Finally, the way he claims to be rejecting all endorsements now is just another way to shirk blame and to try and play it cool and spin this in his favor. Really, Cenk rejecting endorsements now is pretty pointless since his biggest endorsers have already retracted and no one else bigger than Bernie Sanders is going to come along later after this. So really, Cenk Uygur is rejecting endorsements that are never going to come, and he's just doing this now to try and save face. In the end, this whole Bernie and Cenk endorsing and retracting and rejecting bit has turned into a big shit show for the left. First, it's exposed Cenk as a bad candidate and a hack to a much larger audience of Americans, and second, this is clearly putting Bernie Sanders and his campaign in jeopardy too. Had Byrne just stayed silent and left this smaller California election alone, which he should have, I mean, he's just some senator from Vermont on the total opposite end of the country. Well, if Bernie had ignored this election, he would be doing far better right now, but instead, he has egg on his face because Bernie has endorsed and then retracted a very bad candidate in shame, which has not only shown us and the rest of his opposition that Bernie doesn't have the right judgment to be president, but also this has turned a lot of Bernie's own supporters and people on his own side against him too. And they're still going to be mad going forward as well, even after this retraction and non-apology. What do you guys think? Does Cenk still have a chance at winning now? After hearing and knowing what we do know about Uygur at this point, do you even think he deserves to be a politician? Comment your thoughts on everything below, and thanks for watching No Bullshit. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and we'll see y'all next time.